already,
Yeah.
if you think about it, like Sammy said, like people are already living in 15-minute like
The people
neighborhood.
against
Yeah.
15-minute neighborhoods are living in
Are
15-minute
already like
neighborhoods.
living,
Yeah.
yeah, and many of them are actually just living in 15, like it already exists. It
Yeah.
has been existing for years because fundamentally, like
Years. Well, we're back. Welcome back from the break, which is like this for you guys. It's like 10, 20 minutes for us.
Mhm.
Talking about 15-minute cities now. I think before we left off on the perception of space
Yeah.
and the perception of ideas and how that can impact, how people feel about things and how people kind of interact with these spaces and talk about development or push against development. But, as we know, 15-minute cities, I feel like by the time this goes up, it's even more trailed off in
Mhm.
the hot topic as a hot
Mhm.
topic. Wow. Love me some
English.
English. It's tapered off, but maybe we'll bring it back.
We'll bring it back. We'll just like
Bring back the
what
conspiracies.
one last spark before it
Last
dies
sparks.
again.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, no, in all seriousness, I think like with the 15-minute cities, and I think our discussion right now is going to be about like what they are, theory, concepts behind them versus uh what people perceive them to be and the
Mhm.
conspiracies around them. And honestly, amazing videos out there. There's really good videos talking about 15-minute cities. There's very good articles. I think this is more of just a general discussion and
Mhm.
why I think a lot of the things I've seen online is not uh you're not addressing why maybe these problems or concerns are coming up. They kind of address them and going like, oh, it's like a conspiracy theory, or oh, it's this, oh, it's that. And there's just not discussion or like a reflection kind of discussion on it of like, where is this derived from? Where does this maybe come from?
Mhm.
And if there is, it's not in the mainstream, right? Like you have to read the articles, you have to be a part of the videos, you have to reflect on it. So where do we start, Alex? Just what is the 15-minute city?
Yeah, I feel
Actually,
like
first, yeah, sorry.
I was gonna say I feel like we should start with the
Yeah.
controversy around it.
Controversy.
Yeah.
I guess. Do
Want to
you
start
want
us
to
off?
yeah, sure, of course. Yeah, I think the current controversy,
Hmm.
the conspiracies,
Hmm.
is people are worried that it's going to be like data stealing. They're going to lock you in a 15-minute neighborhood radius. If you leave, they just like fine you. You need like permits.
Hmm.
The future is like border patrol, um basically like 1984. I think, I don't know, I haven't read that book in like 10 years, but the
Yeah.
hyper world of like
Surveilled. Yeah.
surveillance and stuff. And that's interesting. It's interesting. I think we were talking about this before, but what's hilarious. The same people that are protesting about 15-minute cities and or 15-minute neighborhoods, 15-minute communities.
Hmm.
I prefer 15-minute communities. I think the term 15-minute city is just, it's too broad of city is like a whole city, but realistically they're talking about communities and space and like these spaces. But it's funny, a lot of these people that are protesting and have concerns about 15-minute communities and 15-minute cities, uh, they live in 15-minute communities. It's like the most absurd, insane thing. It's like, oh no, not a 15-minute community. And then it's like, no, you live in one already.
Hmm.
Shock. Like obviously it can be better, but
Yeah.
you see where they live. They'll live in like Toronto and the bigger cities with more access to transportation, groceries. It's more walkable. And so to kind of talk about what is a 15-minute city or community or neighborhood, I pulled up a thing, a visual that
Hmm.
we can take a quick look at. Um, yeah, let's do it.
Go for it.
So you see this visual. This
Hmm.
visual in itself kind of talks about the varying features. This says the features of a 20-minute neighborhood. This is the 15-minute city, or also goes back to the 20-minute neighborhood.
Hmm.
Um, and so we'll just use this because it has more words, and then we'll go back to the other one.
Hmm.
But the premise of a 15-minute community, 15-minute city, as we know it, is a neighborhood, a community, right? That you can walk within a 15-minute radius, and you can
Hmm.
access transportation amenities, such as like groceries. You can access green spaces, community spaces, hospital, all everything you need to necessarily access within a 15-minute walk or 20-minute walk, right? Or transport, or have access to transportation so it can take you to something within 15 to 30 minutes kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's work and whatnot.
And active transportation a lot. Yeah.
Active transportation, of course.
As well, yeah.
Of course. And but with the perception, so that's what it is. And that's a concept behind a 15-minute community. And that in itself, essentially, in my humble opinion of just like researching and talking to professionals, that has been almost a golden standard of what good planning is for a long time. And I think more recent days and more recent years, with the concept of the 15-minute city coming out, it's more of a way to articulate what condensed dense planning is, right? Because 15-minute cities runs parallel, or it's like this, similar to with like transit-oriented developments. Same thing. You have like a transit hub, you have like hospitals, you have school, you have a place of work within a 15-minute radius, or transit-oriented communities. Same thing. But now I think the conspiracies and the problems surrounding them all kind of derive, and they're kind of rooted in I think I don't want to say, I don't want to use the word absurd, but like concerns. Let's go I'll go from like the most crazy concerns to the least crazy concerns. I think it's like the concerns of like, data protection, right? Down to like border patrol and whatnot. That's like the most kind of
sliding scale. Yeah.
Sliding scale, right? I think when you're talking about like data collection and whatnot, I think in a lot of the concerns actually fall under the concepts of like smart communities, smart city, right? Which that in itself falls under like the 15-minute city, but not because that in itself is a 15-minute city. It's just combining varying things to make things more efficient, right? At least that's how I perceive it to be at this point of time. If I change my mind or my comprehension on it, we'll talk about it later. But currently, that's how I'm perceiving it, and that's how a lot of our peers and professionals I've spoken to perceive it to be as well. I'm obviously simplifying it, just probably varying things to plug in and variables, but essentially it's just that's kind of like the concerns of smart city data collection, who's going to build it and all this stuff. And so now you have the 15-minute city, you have like smart cities and data and surveillance and whatnot being like overlapped. And that's where it gets a little sticky, a little tricky,
a little murky.
Yeah, just a couple more pictures.
But I think you made a good point. You're saying you're simplifying it because, in essence, it is simple. Like when we're talking about 15-minute cities, as you saw like in that diagram, is that you're just talking about, I think a lot of the concerns or controversy around it is that it's like a removal of freedoms. Like they're going to lock us, like people have like characterized it as like a 15-minute prison. And like no one said that, like, when you hit like, it's not the Hunger Games, like you hit the 15-minute period and like a wall slams down, you're stuck. Like that's not it. Like already, if you think about it, like Sami said, like people are already living in 15-minute
the people against 15-minute neighborhoods are living in 15-minute
are already like living. Many of them are actually just living in 15, like it already exists. It has been existing for years, because fundamentally like the radius of that 15 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever it will be is just like sort of like your distance to accessing things. And if you think about it, back in the day before we had cars, and maybe you can even say before we had like horse and buggy and not everyone could ride a horse, I don't know,
when we were hunting stuff,
you could only go so far for so long. So you'd really like for your corner store to be within, a relatively short walk. Like after 30 minutes, you start wondering, you're like, do I really have to go see my friend today? Like, do I really need to go get some more berries for like whatever? You're like, nah. Nah. You like, forget about it. You're like, after 15 minutes, I'm out. I'm done. I mean, so like these are things that already exist. It's fundamental to cities. That's what cities are. It's a compilation. How do you say, like a mixing of different uses, a mixing of different ways of accessing. Ideally, I'll say ideally, not every city is like this ultimately. And there's a lot of work behind the scenes and policies and infrastructure that needs to be done to make it happen. But like, it's not a removal of freedom. That's not what 15-minute cities are. That it's actually giving more choices and freedoms for people to access their
greater
city,
accessibility
to resources and spaces.
And also like third spaces.
Third spaces, but also
Yeah.
like how you can move around the city. Right now, our cities are so car oriented that, you know, it takes long distances to get anywhere. Within 15 minutes, if you're living in a suburb, if you're living in certain areas of the Toronto or of any city in particular, particularly like low income neighborhoods, like we can have a whole other conversation talking about like food deserts and different things, and how in certain areas of the city people have a hard time accessing you know, grocery stores, accessing healthy fresh foods, and they have to go quite far to get access to it. And the same thing applies here, because our cities have been designed for the car and not for like a people scale. Trying to get access to these resources is really hard. And so at the 15-minute city is just basically a recommendation that like people should be able to access all the good things they need to live a good life, you know, within a closer proximity. Yeah.
Exactly. And just to kind of give you guys an idea of a 15-minute community, right? For those in Toronto that are like concerned, or for those who know Toronto, I lived right on Bloor and Shaw, right? I had access to two transportation stations. Wow, two subway stations, right? I had access to three massive parks, like pretty big parks.
Yeah.
I had access to almost three grocery stores, or even four, some of the smaller ones, and fruit markets and whatnot. Access to a whole bunch of main streets, right? I lived on a primary main street, so many local businesses and stores and whatnot. Access to, there's right next to me, there's like 2 to 3 dentists, 2 to 3 family doctors, 30-minute walk to University of Toronto. Like that's a 15-minute community for those who are, what is a 15-minute community, right? Like that's, I had access to everything I need.
Yeah, and I'll add, you also had along Bloor, there was bike lanes. So there's different
public
ways of
transportation.
Exactly. And also there was a number of schools around your neighborhood as well.
Oh,
so
yeah, like up to maybe 3 to 4 public and elementary and high schools, up to 6 maybe. Like it's ideal. It's ideal for families, right? And I'd see a lot of younger kids, like where I grew up, for example, to get to somewhere, even if it was 20 minutes away, it's like on the freeway. No, it's not a freeway, but just a road, but there's like no like greenery. There's no, it doesn't feel very safe. It feels like you're just walking on the side of a highway. And then you get to the store and you're just like, why does that feel like it was so long? It was only like 12, 14, 15 minutes. But like when I lived in Toronto, I walked 30, 40 minutes and it's just, you have all these spaces and people, and people are interacting with like third spaces and open spaces and all this stuff, right? And it kind of gets you comfortable, and you have grow a sense to community. Now, with that being said, right, I do think there are fair concerns, not fair concerns, but I think there are more logical concerns.
Yes.
From academics, and you brought some up off air, right? And I think those concerns might be fair, right? Because they might be a bit more logical. But with that being said, I don't think they're that big of a deal. And the reason I'm not naming any of the actual concerns, because I don't even think they're actual concerns. Right? Like to me, I don't think they're concerns, and I feel like it might just sound a little weird if I talk about them.
Yeah.
But maybe if we do have an academic, or if we do have a listener or a peer of ours that has heard what we were speaking about, they can come on and share their difference of opinion. But overall, most people live in 15-minute communities. I think now, moving forward, the reason that they're being talked about more, and why you're hearing more about them in the news, about like why we need 15-minute communities and stuff, is because now that's the intention, right? Whether it's going to be in the form of a TOD, like transit-oriented development, or like a TOC, transit-oriented communities, or if it's in the form of a smart city, or if it's in the form of whatever it may be, a new development. I think it's just more intentional, and I shouldn't even say that. It's been intentional before, but I think it's just the priority now, or the priority based off of practitioners. Like I think that's what practitioners are pushing for. You know, that now there's like a push away from the car centric kind of design and development. There's this whole maybe we'll share some links in the below, or in the next video we'll talk about like how cities have changed from being a 15-minute community to no longer being a 15-minute community. Now they're trying to go back to being 15-minute communities, right? Essentially, you had access to public transportation, jobs, markets, everything, and now it's like 8-lane car, you need to go 35-minute drive to just buy groceries, or 15-minute drive to buy groceries. And it's not even the drive, it's just the congestion from like your house down the road, congestion to get in. And you're just, yeah. Interesting.
But I think, you know what, you brought up a good point. And I think one of the arguments, or one of the cautionary, some of the, how do you say it? Yeah, cautions around the 15-minute city that have come out that I think is as interesting to highlight is that, like I was saying before, like not necessarily every city is currently a 15-minute city anymore, or like 15-minute neighborhood. They're not organized in that way anymore because they've become so car centric. And so as we try to make these neighborhoods or these areas more, I was gonna say 15-minute city-ish. I don't know how to describe it. You know what? Another word for this, now I thought about it, is just like walkability. That was like all the
walkable.
Rage. Yeah, walkable.
More walkable.
Yeah, no, it was like all the rage.
Or, oh my God. Imagine walking to places.
Or like or being able to get places.
Yeah.
They like active transportation. And I just, for clarification for people listening, walkability is not necessarily saying that you can only walk anywhere. Like you can still take a car if you want. You can take a scooter, you can take a bike. But the idea is that
use your feet if you can.
Use your feet but that's giving you the choice that you don't have to necessarily take a car. You don't even necessarily take a bike or a bus to get where you need to get to, to the things that you really need. They're all within a relatively easy way to get together. So I think, where's it going with this? But basically, you know, with all this development and in cities, all this, it tends to lead to like gentrification. Yes. Gentrification, that word that will appear time and time again. And I feel like when people talk about urban planning, that's the one word that comes to mind. They're like, oh, you mean like gentrification and what's going on there? And like, yeah, but yeah, I love so you have to be careful. The one thing is like, being careful is like, how do we make these cities more how do we make these neighborhoods, these areas more livable? If we make them denser, are we making them denser with affordable housing, or we're just making them dense for the sake of making them dense? Like when we're putting active transportation, are we putting in protected bike lanes and you know, not causing other issues as well? Like how are we mitigating some of the displacement that might come from these different developments? And how are we consulting with different communities to learn about, like, you know, what are the current dynamics, what are the needs, and then how do we bring that together so you make a more like a better or more integrated urban fabric? So I think that's another thing to think about, is some of the concerns about 15-minute cities are like, okay, after you hit a 15-minute like concentric ring, it's over for you. Like it's done, you're never gonna get out. But it's not. I think I like to think about it like it's more like a puzzle piece. Like imagine every neighborhood's like a little piece and you connect it together. So you like click, like within the like 15-minute city, you find your thing, but then you can go beyond and find even more and even more. And that's an entire city in itself.
I think when I was talking about like gentrification, displacement, right? Removing people from their spaces for the money, all the money, right? Like that's obviously not good. And causing people to like forced migration essentially is not it. And so when I initially was talking about like a 15-minute city, I'm talking about the concept in itself isn't a problem. The process of development. And planning, most of the problems I find come from the process of development. Actually, it's not even I think that's like the most agreed upon thing, right? It's like lack of community engagement, lack of this, lack of that. Oh, did you use proper equipment? Did you use, they put asbestos in the thing, now it's killing this minority group. Like, oops, my bad, you know?
Like, we didn't know.
No, we didn't know. Oh, we put $1 billion condo here that only like only rich people can live in. Displaced you, my bad. I just think it's like wild. It's just like not talking about that. Obviously, gentrification, displacement is always a concern. But that kind of goes for anything, right?
That was true. I just
like
thought
almost anything we plan for. It's like, oh, we're just talking about libraries, so like, oh, let's put this beautiful huge library. Maybe it's like a private. I don't think private libraries exist, but like, do they exist? Private libraries? I don't know.
But like, there's not public libraries.
Non-public libraries. How do you profit off of?
Well, I mean, like, you know, like the technically, like if you're in a private university, like those libraries are private.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
But like, you know, like the technically, like if you're not in a private university, like those libraries are private.
Oh, okay. 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 Okay.
Yeah.
You know what's weird? University of Toronto's library. I didn't know you need to get like a membership essentially to get in.
Yeah. Is it
That's
free?
wild.
Is
Well,
it
it's a
free?
public library.
Okay, I'm just checking. I don't
Yeah,
know.
no, I think it's free. I just know like because University of Toronto is like a public school. Does
Yeah.
Canada have private universities like that? I don't know.
I'd have to investigate. Yeah.
I have to investigate. They probably do. Someone's
Mhm.
gonna mock me. You know, like I go to one myself. You know,
Yeah.
sorry, bikes, bikes outside my
But
window.
yeah, but you know, you're right. There is yeah, that's all of planning ultimately, is how do you build things without moving people away? But yeah, how do you without moving people away? How do you build things without
Displacing them, forced
displacing
migration,
them? Yeah,
essentially.
forcing.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
its own topic, of course, and
Yeah.
that's definitely a concern when we're transforming spaces into 15-minute cities. Of course,
Yeah.
not kind of taking away with me saying like, you know, most of the
Yeah.
things I don't believe in. I think I'm kind of like lost in my own mind when it comes to planning. I feel like or geography, urban geography, and planning. It's just like that's
Yeah.
very much it's always there, right? Like that's always the rule. It's like, what about gentrification? What about displacement, right?
Hmm.
Always something to think about. But yeah,